Hey guys, welcome back from break. I hope you all had an awesome Christmas and a very happy new year. I know I'm excited to have 2021 ring in the new year here. So what we're going to talk about is our very last video, and this is on exponents and their rules. So just as a quick little reminder, exponents come from a base. And that base has a power or an exponent on it. So the base is the blue, the bottom value, and then the x or the power is up in the upper right-hand corner. So as you look at our table here, we'll start with our positive powers or positive exponents. So if I have a positive power of 3, that literally means take that base of 2 and multiply it by itself that many times. So 2 times 2 times 2, which ends up giving us 8. All right, so the power of 2, let's follow suit, which is 2 times 2, which is 4. Now 2 to the first power just means there's one base of 2, which means it's just 2. So positive exponents are where you take that power or that exponent, that's the number of times you multiply the base by itself. Now, to understand what the zero and negative exponent rules act like, we're going to use this pattern that we see emerging between our positive exponents. So notice to go from an 8 down to a 4, we had to literally cut it in half or divide by 2. To go from 4 down to 2, we also had to cut me in half or divide by 2. So using that same pattern, we're going to develop something happening here. So if I take this base of 2 and divide it by 2 or cut me in half, then 2 to the 0 power should end up giving us 1 because that's the base divided by its base giving us 1. So 0 as your exponent means that your value is 1, not 0, guys. Be careful with that. And that's because it's the base divided by the base. So that's 1. All right, now let's continue our pattern. So if we take 1 and divide it by 2, we end up getting 1 divided by 2, or 1/2. If I take 1/2 and I divide that in half, we end up getting smaller amounts, which is a quarter. So a half of a cup. If I take a fourth of a cup and I cut that in half, I end up at 1/8 of a cup. So something I want you to make note of is if I have a negative exponent, I can write that as a fraction. And when we write things as a fraction, guys, you're getting smaller and smaller and smaller. You're creating little increments. So negative exponents and 0 as your exponent are two things that you really need to keep in mind going forwards. So negative exponents, we write them as positive exponents by making them into fractions. We make them into small values, tiny increments. Another type of exponent that you may see is a fraction as an exponent. So for example, if I have x as my base and my power is 2 divided by 5, then 2 represents what we call the power, and 5 represents the root value. Fractional exponents are literally equivalent to roots of the same base. So we would write this with a root from the bottom of the power, and then we have our base that's the same, x, and then our power comes from the top of the fraction. So according to that setup, then our 2/5 as our exponent's fraction would become a root of 5 goes on the outside of the root symbol. Our base of x stays inside of the root, and our power still remains as a power of 2. So these two things, guys, are literally equal to each other. They're just written in two different formats. They mean exactly the same thing. So what we're going to do is practice rewriting between both formats. What's the base? What's the power? From the roots and from the base and the exponents given. So based on what we see here, our bases are all... Remember, the power comes from the inside. Now, if there is no power that you see on the inside here, it means that that power is equivalent to 1. And why it's a 1, guys, is because it's a placeholder. If I don't write it, I assume it's a value of 1. Now let's talk about the roots. The first two have roots of 3, so the bottom of our fraction exponent will be a 3. So 7/3 and 1/3. Now this last one doesn't have a number in front, but guys, the smallest root you can ever possibly have is what we call the square root. So we will write that as a 2 is the smallest possible root you can have. So they don't have to write the 2 in front, guys. And why is because 2 is the smallest root possible. All right. So what if we reverse it? And this time we have the base to the power, that's a fraction. Can we write those as roots? So our bases are 27, 4, and y. And now we're going to tear this guy apart. So your power, go inside on the power of your base. Then we take our roots and put them on the outside. So the first one has a cubed root, the second one has a square root, and the third one has a fourth root. Now on the square root, guys, I actually don't have to write the 2 on the outside since a square root is the smallest type of root we can own. All right, now there are 3 exponent rules that are very important for you to know. And I'm going to teach you those rules, but we're going to do it by showing you what the rules are. So we're going to expand a little bit. So we have a product rule, quotient rule, and power rule. And here's how they go. We're going to start with product rule. Now, product means multiply. So if I am multiplying 2 things together, what is its rule? Well, let's use what we know about the powers, the exponents. So if I say 3 squared, that literally means take 3 times 3 twice, and I'm going to multiply that by 3 to the 5th. So altogether, I have a base of 3, and how many 3's am I multiplying together? Well, I have 2, and then I have 5. So literally altogether, I have 7 3's being multiplied together. So we can write this as a base of 3 to the 7th power. That's kind of clever. Now, does that work for variables like y to the 4th times y to the 6th? So again, our base is y, and we're multiplying y by itself how many times? Well, 4 and 6 would make up 10 times I'm multiplying y by itself. So something that you want to make a note of, guys, is we can expand this and then talk about how many of those bases are we multiplying together. And that'll end up giving us our product rule. Now, another way you can see this is if I take 2 and add it to 5, I end up getting a power of 7, right? 2 plus 5. And if I take 4 plus 6 as my power, I end up getting a power of 10. So the product rule says that I can add the exponents if the bases are the same. So I just wrote that rule up at the top for you guys, that when we're multiplying bases that are the same, that you can add their exponents. But honestly, guys, I don't memorize that rule. I just use what I know about exponents and write it out and talk about how many altogether do we have. So you can do that with me on the you try. Take your time. If I have 2 parentheses sitting side by side, that means multiply. So try to multiply those 2 together for me and let's see what you get. So you should have gotten 4x to the 5th y cubed. All right, now let's move into what we call the quotient rule, where we're dividing, dun, 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 your favorite friend. All right, now listen, when we divide, guys, it's not as bad as well. So I have 3 squared divided by 3 to the 5th power. So I'm going to write those out first. Now, am I heavier on the top or am I heavier on the bottom by my 3's? Now, I'm hoping you'd say that I'm bottom heavy, and by how many more than the top? Well, on the top, we have 2 3's that can reduce with 2 3's on the bottom, which means that overall we are bottom heavy by 3 3. Or 3 cubed is on the bottom, and there's nothing remaining on the top except for a placeholder, a 1, to represent the fraction. Now, another way we can is 3 to the negative 3rd power, because that's literally what that is. It's a fraction with a power on the bottom. That's pretty cool. All right, now let's try this other example here, x to the 6 over x squared. So am I top heavy by my x's or am I bottom heavy by my x's? And according to what we have here, guys, 2 of those x's from the bottom will reduce with 2 of the x's from the top, which means we are definitely top heavy by 4 x's. Now, the rule actually says I could take 2 minus 5 from the first example and get -3 as my exponent. Or if I take 6 minus 2 from the bottom, I end up getting a power of 4. So what we say for the quotient rule, guys, is that we keep the same base, but we subtract the exponent. I don't know about you guys, but I always forget if I try to memorize these rules. So instead of trying to memorize, just remember that you can expand the top, expand the bottom, and figure out whether you're top heavy or bottom heavy to get your answer. So why don't you do the U try? So it looks like we have top heavy by 5 x's and we are bottom heavy by 3 y's. And 4/8, guys, we can reduce by dividing both the top and the bottom by 4, which could reduce down to 1/2. So that would actually be the final answer there. All right, last power rule. Whoop, whoop. So the power rule is called this because you have a power within a power. So when you do this, you need to consider the power on the outside. So this is a power of 3, which means I need to take the base and multiply it by itself 3 times. So x squared times x squared times x squared 3 times. And we know that x squared is x times x. So if we expand that out, how many x's are we multiplying together? Well, we're multiplying 6 x's together. So x to the 6th is the answer. Now, same idea here, guys, but the power is 2, which means I need to multiply this base by 2, the whole thing, including the -4. So -4 times -4 is positive 16. And then how many m's do we have in our lineup? So according to what we have 5 from the first, 5 from the second, and 3 from the last. So all together, that makes a power of 13 m's. So 16m to the 13th is your final answer. So let's do the U try, guys. Remember that your power is 2, which means take all of that stuff and multiply it by itself. So you should have came out with 4x to the second on the top and y squared on the bottom. So your power rule, guys, is actually a multiplication. But again, guys, I don't use those rules. I just use my common sense. Use what you know about powers and expand them out and multiply them together. How many of each thing do you got? So here's a quick little summary of what we just talked about with your exponent rules, guys. Your product rule is like adding the powers. Your quotient rule is like subtracting or top heavy, bottom heavy. Your power rule is use that power that many times. The 0 power will always give you 1 because it's the base divided by the base. Your negative exponents are written as fractional amounts because they're small. And your fractions as your powers are written as roots. So what we're going to do is we're going to play a game to kind of get used to using these rules. So let's play a game.